Hello everyone. Hope you enjoy this video. My grandfather was killed in a bar when my father was still a toddler. The official story was that he was murdered over a pinball game. Back then pinball was pretty serious, I guess. It wasn't until recently my grandmother confessed, on her deathbed, that my grandfather actually killed someone and buried the body, days before his own demise. So he was actually killed in retaliation for a murder that he committed. My grandmother kept this secret for almost 65 years. My great-uncle was born from his sister being raped by her father. The family said basically she had just been a loose lady, and not right in the head. They locked her up in the attic. After my great-uncle passed, my mother and I went into the multi-generation house to clean it out. The door to the attic, where Mom was kept but long since passed. The door had an outside lock. No creepy claw marks or anything. But it was just so sad. My mom pulled the lock off and announced to the house that she would never be shut away again. It's me. My dad never told his family I existed. I was shameful. Maybe he was more ashamed. After he died they found out about me and kindly asked me not to come to the funeral. I get why he never told them. A year or two after her adoptive mother died, my mom went looking for information about her birth parents, and found that her birth mum and her husband had been gruesomely murdered by a drug cartel. There was an article about their murder in Rolling Stone magazine that had gory pictures of their bodies. My cousin, once removed, my parents' cousin, was kidnapped, raped and tortured by a serial killer. She was, after many days, dropped off near a running path with her neck slit. She lived, unlike the other three, and she could lead the police to his home. He is still in prison. As a child I heard whispering of it and didn't find out the whole truth until I was older. Edit, not great aunt. Second cousin. Edit 2. My cousin, once removed, as part of opening a home daycare, Mom found somebody on the sex offender registry with our family's very unusual last name. Mom called Grandpa. He confirmed that he is related to us. He hadn't seen him in decades. He didn't know he had been convicted for statutory but thought that sounded about right. We're not supposed to ask about him again. My great-grandfather shot and killed a man in his grocery store back in the 30s over a poker game. He ran a speakeasy out of the back of his store and lost almost $2,000. So as the guy was walking out the front after the store closed, he shot him and got away with it by telling the police the man robbed him. It wasn't until he was on his deathbed he told my grandfather what had happened. Edit. This was in Ohio. I had an uncle who moved far away, worked in a boiler room at a huge casino, decades ago. He was always sketchy, and he had way more money than a simple boiler room employee ought to have had. Rumors that the boiler room was a really useful thing for the mob, due to boilers doubling as incinerators for certain purposes. Hence the money. Many unanswered questions there. One family member killed another by leaving a bag of poisoned donuts on the front steps. We are now hesitant about accepting donuts. Where do you live with such frivolous donut dispersion? I learned my disabled great-aunt was raped multiple times while she was in high school, including by a teacher, and it resulted in at least 3 pregnancies that she was forced to carry and give up for adoption, and then shamed for. I found out because I did 23andMe and found cousins my dad couldn't explain, so there was a very awful phone call to understand why. Found out last year that I am a direct descendant Thomas Rood. He was the first person to be executed for incest in the US. He raped his daughter Sarah and it came to light when she gave birth to a son named George. My family line is descended from George. Dad's cousin was a prominent Catholic priest known for his staunchly anti-LGBT views. Well, it was quite the surprise when he was arrested trying to solicit a blowjob from an undercover cop at a gay bookstore in New Orleans. My family is of Swiss descent. My great-grandfather murdered someone back in Switzerland, then fled to the US with his wife. They moved to a small town in Virginia and had my grandpa along with his siblings. Grandpa only found out about this because he found multiple journals depicting the turmoil it caused between him and his wife while fleeing to the US. My grandpa was kidnapped and forced to work for the Viet Cong. When he died in combat, no one on either side would claim him, so he was buried in an unmarked grave. My grandma was left caring for 3 kids, my mom, aunt, uncle. Grandma was working in the fields until someone got her to work as a bar girl in Saigon. She met my now step-grandfather, American GI, and they got married and she moved to Ohio with him. She never told him she had any kids BC she didn't think he would marry her. When my mum came to America 2 decades later, my grandma made her say my mum was her niece. I still call him uncle. My cousin might actually be my uncle. His mom boinked my grandfather not long before she discovered her pregnancy. There hasn't been a paternity test, but my cousin learned about it and it fucked him up. Edit, for clarity, the mom married into the family. So when they did the deed, it was as father and daughter-in-law. When I was little I found out my mother was hated by her entire family due to she having a different mother than all her siblings, and I only know this because I was hated due to me having a different father than all of my siblings, so my grandmother told me, her biological mom. It feels strange having so much family but have nobody even want to associate with you. I am actually the dark family's secret. All of my brothers and sister know, but they don't know that I know. They've kept the secret from everyone except one person, and that person told me. My mother had a secret affair that resulted in pregnancy, and my father raised me like I was his own. I sometimes contemplate about whether to tell my sons, but probably won't. I actually recalled having met the other father when I was really young, but not since, and not interested in meeting him now. Both of my parents have passed, so I'm not going to make any issues out of it. My uncle is currently in a relationship with a famous Japanese porn star. Oh, and then there's the time we found a body in the wall of my grandparents' house while we were trying to figure out where a leak was coming from. Turns out my great-grandfather killed around 5 people. Never knew why. Still freaks me out. My great-grandfather was an alcoholic and drank beer daily while driving to and from work. One day, he was on a gravel road and hit a little girl. She passed away and one of his friends took the blame. I'm not sure why the friend took responsibility, but apparently, my great-grandfather wasn't the same after that. He quit drinking and changed his ways. My grandpa was an engineer who worked on the atom bomb and some missiles in New Mexico. He also designed safety mechanisms on some guns. My family's a bunch of pacifist vegans, and my parents met at an anti-bomb rally, so this fact is generally not spoken of. My grandfather was in the Klan. My great-aunt stole my mum and her brother from my grandmother and sold them to an adoption agency and declared them dead. My mother still hasn't found my biological grandmother after 48 years, though she thinks she did see her once on a visit to Korea. My uncle maybe killed his best friend and made it look like a suicide so he could be with his buddy's girlfriend, who was cheating on his wife with and got hooked on drugs with her. Also maybe ran guns for motorcycle clubs. And pretty sure my step-grandfather killed my grandmother, but got away with it. My grandfather, Dad's side, committed suicide by driving his car into a wall under a bridge, leaving behind his wife, my grandma, and 10 children. That was in 1970. My aunts and uncles refused to call it a suicide, they just refer to it as the accident. Fast forward to 1987 and my dad named me after the sob. My grandmother was murdered by her neighbor, who killed himself right after, because his family left him and he thought my grandmother knew and just wouldn't tell him. She didn't. Sad. My parents waited a long time to tell me. This is why I never knew my grandmother. I'd go about the darkest, but my father held my 16-year-old brother down on the ground while my mother pummeled his head with a petrified wood club. I can remember the sound of the club hitting his skull, or I guess I remember the sound of vibration from the collision. I just watched, and I have always felt ashamed that I just watched. Thanks for watching. Please like, comment and subscribe. Please. For me.